Snow fell in veils, pale against the black breath of the waiting station. Boards groaned as the wind pushed through the seams, rattling loose nails, carrying with it the hollow cry of something forgotten. On the platform, half buried in drift, sat a girl hardly more than grown, though her belly curved heavy before her, pressing against the thin cotton of her dress. Eliza May clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the fabric stiff with frost, her lips cracked and swollen. Each exhale drifted into the cold and vanished, as if even her breath refused to stay near her. Her father's voice still burned in her ears, sharp, final, as the wagon turned its back. "You'll bring shame on every one of us. Better you meet your end than drag our name further into mud." The others did not look back. Not her sisters with their eyes lowered, not her brother gripping the reins. Her stepmother's hand had waved once, but not in farewell, more as if brushing away a stain on her skirt. Then the wheels had creaked, carrying the last thread of family into the storm, leaving her to the snow, the silence, and the slow ache of her child pressing against her ribs. She had begged them. Not for mercy, for she knew mercy had long dried in their eyes, but for a corner of the barn, a blanket, a moment to bring her child into the world where voices might witness its cry. But even that was too costly. A bastard child, they said, carried no worth. She was 18, ruined, fit only to be left behind. The station loomed around her, its windows fogged from the stove burning inside. She had dared not enter, fearing the gaze of Mrs. Whitlock, the keeper's wife, who already let her tongue wag in the saloon. That girl's carrying sin, plain as day. No ring, no husband, just trouble waiting to be born. Better to freeze outside than feel the sting of that woman's eyes again. Her fingers were blue at the knuckles, nails broken from clutching the bench too tightly. She leaned forward, forehead against the wood, whispering prayers she half remembered from childhood. The baby shifted, pressing hard, and pain stitched across her back. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, not wanting her weakness to echo in that hollow place. The whistle of a faraway train answered anyway, long and mournful, reminding her of what left and what never came. Time thickened. Snow blurred the horizon until she felt herself dissolving into it, as if she were no more than another flake to be swallowed by the wind. Her heart slowed. She thought of the quilt her mother once wrapped her in, before death claimed that tender figure, before her father's hands turned hard with whiskey and anger. That quilt had been patched in pinks and blues, smelling of lavender. She had not seen it in years, but now it unfolded in her memory like the last shelter she would ever know. She swayed, nearly slipping from the bench, when the door creaked open. A slice of firelight cut the dark, and with it came the figure of Mrs. Whitlock, wrapped in wool and suspicion. "You'll die out here, girl," the woman said, though her tone carried no true concern. Her eyes slid to the curve of Eliza's stomach, then to the snow crusted on her shoes. "Perhaps it's what comes when sin ripens. Folks whisper, and you've only yourself to blame." Eliza could not summon words, only lowered her gaze to the frost blooming on her dress. Mrs. Whitlock sniffed, pulled her shawl tighter, and returned inside, leaving the door to slam hard enough that Eliza startled. Firelight winked out, and again she was alone with the storm. A sob threatened, but she smothered it, swallowing it like a stone. Pride, what little remained, would not allow her to give the woman satisfaction, even if unseen. She would endure. She had endured worse. The slap of her father's hand, the jeers of village boys, the shame that followed her like smoke. If the cold took her, so be it. Better to leave quietly than crawl back to faces that never wanted her. But the body betrays what spirit wills. Her head bowed heavy, her breath slowing, her body folding inward around the life that still fought to be born. Her eyelids sank. The world softened. Snow whispered over the tracks, covering her like earth over a grave. Then, a sound. Not the station door this time, nor the shriek of iron wheels. A rhythm steadier, closer. Boots pressing into snow, deliberate, each step weighted with something older than haste. She tried to lift her head, but her neck trembled too much. All she saw was the blur of shapes, a broad shadow, taller than most men, shoulders wide as the doorway itself. The figure stopped before her bench. She felt heat, strange in that freezing air, rolling from skin bared to the storm. She forced her eyes higher. The man was shirtless, chest gleaming with frost and sweat, as if he had walked through winter itself without flinching. Scars traced across his skin, not hidden, but carried like history carved in flesh. His hair, black as raven's wing, fell loose over his shoulders, and his gaze, dark, unyielding, settled on her not with scorn but with something else, something she could not name. For a long breath, he said nothing. Only the snow moved, circling them, the storm bending as though to listen. She trembled, waiting for judgment, for a blow, for mockery. Instead, he knelt. The platform groaned under his weight. He studied her face, her cracked lips, the swell of her stomach beneath her dress. His hand, broad and scarred, reached not to touch but to hover, as if asking permission from the air itself. And then he spoke, his voice low, threaded with a strength that carried beyond words. "I chose you as my wife." Her breath caught. She thought she had misheard, that fever or cold had woven dreams into her ear. But his eyes did not waver, nor his tone bend. She searched his face for cruelty, for jest, but found only certainty, solid as stone. Tears pricked her eyes, not from joy but disbelief. She tried to speak, to tell him he was mistaken, that she was ruined and unwanted, but her throat held only air. The storm howled behind him, yet she heard his words again in her mind, steady, undeniable. Her strength broke. She sagged against the bench. He moved swiftly, arms sliding beneath her, as if she were no more than a child to be lifted. Heat enveloped her, his skin burning against her frozen body. She wanted to resist, to cling to what little pride remained, but exhaustion stole her will. Her head fell against his shoulder, cheek pressed to the warmth of him. His heartbeat was steady, a drum she had never known. The world tilted as he carried her from the station. Snow whipped around them, but it seemed to part for his steps. Her eyes fluttered open once more, catching the glow ahead. Dim, flickering, a promise carved against the storm. The light of a cabin window, amber through the white. Her lips parted, a half-breath of protest leaving them. But no sound followed. The storm swallowed her words. As her vision dimmed, the last thing she saw was that flame, waiting like an anchor in the snow. And then, nothing but the steady rhythm of his stride, and the whisper of a promise she could not yet believe. Eliza woke to the scent of smoke and cedar, her body cocooned in furs heavier than anything she had ever known. The air inside was thick with warmth, too rich after the bite of winter, and for a moment she thought she had died, that this was some vision where the cold no longer clawed her. But then the sound came, low, steady, like the crack of firewood giving way, and her eyes opened to the dim glow of a cabin room. The walls were rough-hewn logs, sap still caught in their seams, and shadows clung to their edges where the fire's reach failed. A kettle hissed softly above the flames, the only voice in the silence, save for the slow scrape of a blade against wood. Cale sat nearby, cross-legged on the floor, carving with patient hands. His chest still bare, though now the firelight gilded every scar across it in copper and gold. He had not noticed her stirring, or if he had, he gave no sign. His focus rested on the piece of wood he held, small, delicate, as his knife whispered along its grain. Eliza's throat was dry. She tried to sit up, but pain coiled in her back and her strength faltered. Before she could fall, his shadow rose. He was beside her in an instant, one arm steadying her shoulder, the other adjusting the furs so they would not slip. His movements were careful, practiced, as if handling something fragile. "I..." Her voice broke, thin as a reed. She swallowed, tried again. "Why?" He did not answer. He turned away, lifted the kettle, poured broth into a wooden bowl, and placed it gently into her hands. His eyes lingered only long enough to ensure she could grip it, then returned to the silence that seemed to be his tongue. The broth steam rose into her face, carrying the scent of herbs she did not know. She sipped, though her lips trembled, and warmth slid down into her belly where cold had dwelled too long. Tears came unbidden. Not from kindness, she did not yet dare name it so, but from the sudden ache of being fed when she had braced herself for hunger's end. Cale sat once more by the fire. The knife resumed its rhythm, each stroke marking time in the hush. Eliza watched him, waiting for words that did not come, until the weight of her own silence pressed too heavy. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't know what I've done. Still he carved. The fire popped. Outside, snow beat gently against the cabin walls. Her voice faltered, as though swallowed by the world itself. In the days that followed, silence became the language between them. He left food by her side before she woke. He drew water from the stream, his hair damp with melt when he returned. He laid wood on the fire, always before it died. Each gesture was wordless, yet each was undeniable. She was not left, not cast aside, not ignored. Shame warred with relief in her heart. She wanted to believe his care was duty, nothing more, but she could not unsee the way he glanced at her when he thought her asleep, how his hand lingered at the latch when strangers passed by the cabin trail. It was Mrs. Whitlock who came first, her knock sharp, her cheeks red from the cold. Cale opened the door but stood in the frame, blocking the way. Her voice carried over his shoulder. "Eliza May, you can't stay here. Folks are saying things already. An Apache man, alone with you? You'll have no place in this town come spring." Eliza, still weak in bed, clutched the fur to her chest and said nothing. Shame curled around her like smoke. Mrs. Whitlock's eyes narrowed past Cale's shoulder, sharp as blades. "You think silence will save you?" "It won't. He won't marry you, girl. He can't. He'll keep you till he tires, then leave you with nothing but another mouth to feed." Cale's stance did not shift. He said nothing, only closed the door with a finality that rang like iron. Eliza pressed her hands over her face, heat and humiliation burning through her. She expected him to turn on her, to cast her out as the town wished. Instead, he crossed the room, placed something on the table beside her bed, and returned to the fire. When her breath steadied, she looked. A comb, carved from wood, smooth along its teeth, its back shaped with the quiet care of hours. She touched it, and the edges fit her palm as if it had waited for her all along. The fire whispered. Outside, the storm raged. She ran her fingers over the comb again and again, as though its grain might anchor her. In the stillness of night, when the flames had ebbed to coals, Eliza lay awake. Cale's breathing was steady where he rested on the floor, a blanket his only cover. She thought of his silence, not empty but full. He did not question her shame, nor demand her story, nor weigh her worth against the town's whispers. He simply remained, as constant as the logs in the fire, as immovable as the storm that caged them in. And for the first time, she wondered if silence could be safer than words. Days blurred into one another, each marked by small exchanges. Her stitching the tear in his trousers, his leaving fresh water near her bed, her humming broken lullabies into the quiet, his eyes lifting once from the carving to watch her mouth form those sounds. But the cabin was not a world untouched. Shadows of gossip pressed at its edges. She heard them in Mrs. Whitlock's words, felt them in the weight of Cale's watchfulness when footsteps crunched along the frozen path. Each day, judgment drew nearer. The snow fell heavier. Their world shrank to walls and silence and firelight, to gestures and glances that stitched threads of something unnamed between them. Eliza felt it, fragile, impossible but real, as if she had stepped into a life the world swore she did not deserve. Then one morning, a knock sounded, louder than before, hard enough to rattle the door on its hinges. Cale rose, shoulders taut, hand brushing the knife at his side. Eliza's breath caught. She clutched the comb in her fist. The voice on the other side was deeper than Mrs. Whitlock's, edged with authority. "Open up. Sheriff's orders." The silence inside the cabin thickened, heavy as the storm outside. The knock came again, heavier this time, shaking snow from the roof beams. Cale stood before the door, his breath steady, the knife in his hand catching the glow of the fire. Eliza clutched the comb he had carved for her, her heart hammering like a drum too fast to keep. She thought of Mrs. Whitlock's whispers, of wagging tongues in town, of the way shame spread quicker than flame in dry grass. This moment felt like their judgment had found her, wrapped in the sheriff's voice. The latch lifted. Cold poured in with Sheriff Harlan's broad frame, his coat lined with wolf fur, his hat low, eyes hard as the iron pistol at his hip. Snow clung to his boots as he stepped inside without invitation. His gaze swept over Cale first, then landed on Eliza in the bed, and lingered there like a brand. "So it's true," he muttered, pulling his gloves off finger by finger. "Girl, You've got yourself tied up with an Apache. Folks are saying you're being held here. You want to tell me that ain't the case?" Eliza opened her mouth, but words stuck in her throat. She wanted to say she had not been forced, that Cale's silence and strength had steadied her more than her own blood ever had. Yet under the weight of the sheriff's stare, all she could feel was her father's shadow pressing against her chest. She lowered her eyes, ashamed without reason, and the silence deepened. Harlan turned to Cale. "You know the law. A white girl in your cabin brings trouble. Folks are uneasy. You'd best let me take her back." Cale said nothing, though the fire caught on the dark gleam of his eyes. He did not move, did not lower the knife, though neither did he lift it. His presence was its own refusal. "I'm not asking," the sheriff pressed, stepping closer. The wood creaked beneath his boots. His hand hovered near his belt, fingers brushing the holster. "I'll come back with men if I must. You've no right to keep her." Eliza's pulse thudded in her ears. Her lips parted and she whispered, "He hasn't kept me. He saved me." Her voice cracked at the last word, as if it carried too much truth to hold. Harlan's gaze flicked back to her, sharp with disbelief. "Saved you? From what? From your own mistakes? Don't fool yourself, girl. He'll cast you out once you've served your use. That's their way." His words struck like stones, and shame rose hot in Eliza's chest. Yet beneath it, something else stirred, an ember of defiance. She glanced at Cale, who remained unmoving, as if rooted deeper than the storm. She thought of the broth he had placed in her hands, the water by her bed, the comb carved smooth for her hair. Small acts, unspoken, yet more shelter than she had known in all her years. The sheriff read her silence as weakness. He pulled his gloves back on, the leather snapping tight. "I'll give you until the thaw," he said, his tone final. "Then she comes back. One way or another." He left with the wind, slamming the door behind him, leaving snow swirling through the room before Cale pushed it shut. The cabin returned to silence, but it was a heavier silence than before, laden with threat. Eliza curled into the furs, her hands trembling around the comb. She felt the weight of the town pressing in through the walls, whispering judgment into every crack. That night, Cale sat near the fire again, knife and wood in hand. Eliza lay awake, staring at the rafters. At last she whispered, "They'll come for me." He looked up. The firelight traced across his scars, his dark eyes holding hers. He gave no words, but his hand stilled on the carving, as if to tell her that silence itself could be shield enough. Yet she did not feel protected. She felt the noose of gossip tightening, the law coiling to strike. The days grew whiter, storms piling drifts high against the walls. Eliza kept to the bed at first, her body slow to recover, but she began to rise, gathering strength. She stitched a tear in Cale's trousers, her needle clumsy, but his glance when he saw it was softer than any thanks spoken aloud. She began to hum as she worked, old lullabies her mother once sang, and the notes filled the silence with something fragile and almost living. Cale listened. One night, as her voice drifted into the air, he smiled. Small, fleeting, but real. The sight startled her. She had not seen a man smile at her without malice in so long, she almost forgot it was possible. Yet the town did not forget her. Mrs. Whitlock returned. Her basket of supplies set heavy on the table, her mouth spilling more venom than food. The sheriff's watching close. "You'll bring fire on this cabin if you linger. The girl should come back with me, for her own good." Cale blocked the door again. Eliza wished she could speak, wished she could stand tall, but her throat closed. Shame coiled tighter, as if Mrs. Whitlock's words were nails in her skin. When the woman left, Cale crossed to the table, placed a strip of leather in Eliza's hand. He had braided it into a band, simple but firm. He nodded toward her hair, and she understood. With trembling fingers, she bound her hair back. It was the first time she had touched it without fear of mockery in months. Her reflection in the kettle's dark metal startled her. She did not look ruined. She looked alive. Snow buried the trails, locking them further from the world. The cabin became their only country. Eliza learned Cale's silences, how each had its own shape. The silence of warning when he watched the door, the silence of patience as he carved, the silence of listening when she hummed. She began to answer in kind, not with words but with gestures. The mending of cloth, the hum of song, the careful stirring of the pot when her strength allowed. Their lives folded into one another like threads crossing. But shadows still pressed at the edges. One evening, as she leaned by the fire, her child shifting inside her, Eliza thought she heard voices outside. Not the wind this time, but low murmurs, men's laughter, carrying through the snow. She stiffened. Cale was already on his feet, knife in hand, his body poised. The voices faded, swallowed by the storm, but her fear did not. The town had not forgotten. Their judgment walked closer each day, wearing boots, carrying rifles. She knew it. She could feel it in her bones. That night, she lay awake long after Cale's breathing steadied. Her mind whirled with shame and fear and something sharper. An ache for dignity, for the right to stand and say she was not what they called her. Yet when she thought of speaking, her throat closed. So instead she hummed again, so softly she thought it would break. A lullaby, fragile, trembling. Cale's eyes opened in the dark. He watched her, his gaze deep as night, and when her voice faltered, he reached to place another log on the fire. The flames rose, steady, carrying her song higher. In that moment she felt a shift. Judgment might come, but she was not alone. The days thickened. The storm grew heavier. The sheriff's promise hung in the air like steel. Eliza felt her body tightening with pains she did not yet name, her child restless, her breath sharp at times. She tried to ignore it, stitching, humming, binding her hair with the leather band. But the storm outside grew wild, howling like wolves against the walls. Then, one night, the pain sharpened sudden and fierce, tearing her from sleep. She gasped, clutching her belly, sweat breaking cold across her skin. The storm battered the cabin, and she knew. The time had come. Cale was beside her before she could cry out, his hands steady, his eyes fierce in the firelight. The child was coming, and the storm would not wait. The storm beat against the cabin, as if the heavens themselves sought to break through. Snow roared against the logs, rattling shutters, burying the world beyond in white. Inside, the fire strained, smoke curling in frantic spirals as if it too feared the gale. Eliza clutched her belly, the first cry torn from her throat sharp as a blade. The child pressed downward, fierce, relentless, demanding its place in a world that had given her none. Cale was at her side in an instant, his hand firm on her shoulder, his other placing a folded fur beneath her back. His chest glistened with sweat despite the cold air rushing through every crack, the storm's fury leaking in. He spoke at last, low and steady, words in his tongue she did not know, yet their rhythm steadied her breath. They sounded ancient, like chants carried by rivers and winds long before she was born. Another pain seized her, doubling her body into fire. She screamed, her voice rising above the storm, echoing against the rafters. Shame twisted inside her. What if those voices beyond the storm heard her weakness? Yet there was no room for pride. The storm drowned everything, and Cale's eyes held her fast, unshaken. Between cries, memories came unbidden. Her father's back turning as the wagon rolled away, her sisters refusing to meet her gaze, the station bench hard and cold beneath her bones. She had been left to die, nameless, ruined. Now, with the child tearing through her body, she feared she would indeed die. But not alone. Cale moved swiftly, soaking cloths, stoking the fire, placing water to her lips. His silence was not absence. It was strength, a wall she could lean against while her body broke. She clutched his wrist once, desperate, nails digging into his skin, expecting him to flinch. He did not. His arm was stone, his presence unyielding. The storm howled louder, shaking the door on its hinges. Snow seeped through the cracks, dusting the floor in white. Outside she thought she heard voices, men's laughter, the crunch of boots, but the storm devoured them. She could not tell if they were real, or only her fear given shape. Her cries built to a rhythm. Pain came in waves, crushing, then fading, then rising again. Cale counted them in silence, his gaze sharp, his hands steady. He tore strips of cloth with his teeth, laid them beside the fire to warm. His knife, cleaned, glinted at the ready. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. The storm made time meaningless. Her world shrank to the pounding of her heart, the tearing of her body, the firelight blurring as sweat stung her eyes. She wept without knowing, her tears mixing with snowflakes that slipped through the roof beams. "Please," she whispered once, voice broken. "Please, not alone." Cale bent closer, his forehead near hers, his voice again in that ancient tongue, the cadence low, insistent, like a vow. Though she did not understand the words, she felt their truth. She would not be alone. Not now, not ever. The child's cry came at dawn, piercing through the roar of the storm like a bell. Eliza gasped, her body collapsing back against the firs, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Cale held the infant high enough for the firelight to crown its tiny features, its skin flushed, its lungs strong enough to challenge the blizzard. A daughter! Cale wrapped her in furs, pressed her into Eliza's arms. For a moment, shame fled, swept away by wonder. She stared at the fragile life nestled against her chest, its breath fast and fierce, its cry softening into tiny whimpers. Her heart, bruised and weathered by rejection, cracked open. "I thought," she whispered, voice breaking. "I thought I was nothing. But you—" She could not finish. The tears came harder, her words dissolving. She kissed her daughter's damp brow, her body trembling with exhaustion and awe. Cale sat beside her, one massive hand resting gently on the child's head. His touch was reverent, as though he honored not just flesh but the spirit within. For the first time since she had seen him, his lips parted in words she understood. "Strong." It was all he said, but the word carried weight, a blessing spoken into the storm. Outside, the blizzard began to break. Light bled pale through the shutters, dawn spreading faint gold across the snow. Yet with the light came another sound. Boots in the drifts, voices raised above the dying wind. Eliza stiffened, clutching the child closer. Cale rose, knife in hand, shoulders squared, his chest gleaming with firelight. He moved to the door, every line of his body sharpened for battle. The knock this time was not polite, not hesitant. It rattled the cabin, rattled her bones. A fist slammed hard, then another and another. "Eliza May." The sheriff's voice cut through the wood. "Come out now. We know you're in there. We won't ask again." Her blood turned to ice. The warmth of her newborn against her chest felt suddenly fragile, breakable. She pressed her lips to the child's head, whispering a prayer. Cale stood by the door, his breath steady, his blade ready, his silence heavier than the storm itself. The sheriff's voice came again, louder, angrier. "Open up, or we'll come through." Eliza's tears had not yet dried when fresh ones fell. The fire flickered, the child whimpered, and the storm outside seemed no longer of snow but of men. She looked at Cale, and for the first time, she did not see only strength. She saw the choice that lay before them both, whether to surrender her dignity to the town that had abandoned her, or to stand with him in the fire of their judgment. The door shook under fists, snow dust falling from the rafters. Her heart pounded in answer. The pounding on the cabin door grew harder, rattling the frame as snow sifted down from the rafters. Eliza clutched her newborn against her chest, her arms trembling but firm, as if her body alone could shield the fragile life within. Cale stood before the door, knife in hand, his broad shoulders squared against the storm of men outside. His silence carried weight, but she felt the tremor of danger in the air. This was not the storm of nature, but the storm of judgment. The sheriff's voice barked again, sharp as iron. "Eliza May, you open this door. We're here for your safety. You've no place in there." Her heart thudded. She had no safety among them, not when they had abandoned her to die at the station. Her lips brushed her child's damp brow, whispering words even she could not hear. Then Cale turned, his gaze falling on her. His eyes asked a question without sound, a question of choice. Her voice rose before fear could silence it. "Open it," she whispered. Cale's brow furrowed, but he obeyed. The latch lifted, and the door swung wide to reveal the sheriff and a line of men with rifles in their hands. Snow swirled around them, pale light catching on their weapons, on the suspicion etched into every face. Mrs. Whitlock stood among them, her mouth pressed thin, her eyes sharp with the satisfaction of judgment come to roost. The sheriff stepped forward, boots sinking into the snow-dusted floor. "It ends here. Girl, you're coming back with us. You've been misled. You're not safe." Eliza's arms tightened around her child. Her voice trembled, but she forced it through the air. "I am not misled. I was abandoned. I was left to freeze. He carried me here. He kept me alive." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're saying. He has no right to you. He has no law." Her chest heaved, the weight of every whispered shame pressing against her ribs. She had lived so long under silence, under judgment, under voices that told her she was nothing. But now she held proof against them, her daughter, warm and breathing in her arms. For her, Eliza would not cower. "He gave me more than law," she said, her voice rising clearer. "He gave me dignity. You would have left me to die." Her gaze swept the crowd, catching Mrs. Whitlock's eyes. "You all would have turned away. But he didn't." The men shifted uneasily, their rifles lowering a fraction. Snow hissed against the threshold, the storm softening as the sky cracked with morning light. The sheriff's face reddened, torn between pride and doubt. Cale stepped forward then, his knife glinting, though he did not raise it. His presence alone was enough. He stood tall, silent, every scar across his chest a testament to battles endured, to survival carved into flesh. His eyes burned, not with anger but with unflinching resolve. The sheriff spat into the snow. "This won't stand. The town won't accept it." Eliza's voice broke through the air, steadier now. "Then let the town watch. I am not leaving." She stepped forward, out from the shadow of the cabin, into the snow, the child pressed close to her heart. Her feet sank into the white, the cold biting her skin, but her chin lifted higher than it ever had. Cale moved with her, his hand resting over hers where it held the infant, his silence sealing their union. For a long breath, no one spoke. The storm itself seemed to pause. Then Mrs. Whitlock lowered her eyes, shame flickering across her features. One of the men coughed, shuffled back. The rifles wavered, their weight too heavy to hold against a woman who had found her voice. The sheriff's mouth twisted, but even he could not deny what stood before him. A girl who had been nothing, now a mother with a warrior at her side. Pride alone dragged his words out. "We'll be watching. If trouble comes, it'll be on your head." He turned, his men following, their boots crunching into the snow as the storm slowly loosened its grip. Mrs. Whitlock cast one last glance over her shoulder. But this time there was no triumph in her gaze, only something muted, uncertain. Then they were gone, swallowed by the white. Silence returned, but it was no longer heavy with fear. The fire crackled behind them, the wind softened, and the sun broke pale and gold over the drifts, setting the snow aglow. Eliza stood in it, her breath visible, her body trembling from exhaustion, but her heart steady. She leaned into Cale's side, the weight of his arm like a shield, her child nestled between them. She had been cast out, called nothing, left to die. Yet here in the snow, she had chosen to stand. Her lips pressed against her daughter's forehead, her eyes closing. "We are not nothing," she whispered. "We are enough." Cale's silence answered, a silence fuller than any vow. He drew her closer, their child warm between them, and together they faced the vast expanse of white stretching to the horizon. The storm had ended, but another storm waited in the hearts of men. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. Yet in that moment, beneath the newborn sun, she carried no shame. She carried only her child, her choice, and the unspoken bond of the man beside her. The snow glittered like scattered glass, the wind easing into a hush. And as the cabin smoke curled into the morning sky, the world bore witness, not to a girl broken, but to a woman who had stood and endured. Then, faint and distant, a sound echoed across the quiet, a whistle, sharp and long. The train's call carried through the cold, a reminder of the place where her abandonment had begun. But she no longer shivered at its voice. She tightened her hold on her child, lifted her chin, and let the sound pass through her like wind through the pines. The storm of men had come to her door, and she had not faltered. She had spoken. She had chosen. And though the world still watched, still whispered, it could no longer unmake what had been forged in fire and snow.